There's a moment in the life of every child raised by narcissistic parents that changes everything. It's not a moment of overt violence. It's not a screaming match. It's not even a moment that an outsider would notice. It's a silent moment, internal, devastating. It's the moment the child finally understands. I am not loved. Not the way I need to be loved. Not unconditionally. Not really. Carl Jung spent years studying this moment. He observed that something happens in the child's psyche when this realization finally takes hold. Something that fundamentally alters the entire structure of their personality. Today, I want to show you what happens inside the mind of a child when they discover they are not loved. I'm going to reveal the psychological collapse that follows this realization, and I'm going to show you how this discovery shapes everything they become. But before we go any further, I need you to understand something crucial. The child doesn't discover this all at once. It's not a single moment of revelation. It's an accumulation. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of micro-perceptions that add up over the years, until at some point, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Each time their mum looks at them with disdain instead of tenderness. Each time their dad ignores them instead of offering comfort. Each time the child cries and no one comes. Each time they try to show something and are rejected. Each time they perceive that their sibling is treated differently. These are small pieces of evidence, tiny proofs that the child collects unconsciously. And at some point, the pile of evidence becomes too large. The weight becomes impossible to bear, and the denial that protected the child finally gives way. And it's in that moment that everything crumbles. Let me tell you about a man named Ethan. Ethan was 42 years old when he came to my office. He was successful, an entrepreneur, married, a father of two. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But Ethan had a problem that no one could explain. He couldn't believe that anyone truly loved him. Not his wife, not his children, not his friends. No matter what they said, no matter how they showed it, he simply couldn't absorb it. There was an invisible wall between him and any expression of love. When we began to explore his history, Ethan said he didn't remember any specific trauma. His parents never hit him, never physically abandoned him, never did anything he could point to and say, that was abuse. But there was something. Ethan remembered a specific day. He was 8 years old. It was his birthday. He was excited. He had invited some friends from school. His mom had promised to bake a cake. But when he got home from school that day, he found his mom on the sofa, watching television. No cake, no decorations, nothing prepared. Ethan asked about the party. His mom looked at him with irritation. "What party? I have better things to do. Do you think the world revolves around you?" Ethan just stood there. His friends were arriving in 2 hours. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't complain. He went to his room, called each friend, said the party had been cancelled. He made up an excuse, and he sat on his bed in silence, staring at the wall. And it was in that moment, sitting on that bed, at 8 years old, that Ethan finally understood. He doesn't love me. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. There had been dozens of previous situations. Small acts of negligence, small forgettings, small demonstrations that he wasn't a priority. But that day was different. That day was the day the pile of evidence became too large. The day the denial gave way. the day the truth became impossible to ignore. 34 years later, in my office, Ethan cried for the first time since that day. And as he cried, he said something that sums it all up. I've spent my entire life trying to prove that perception wrong, that I was lovable, that I deserved love. But deep down, somewhere inside me, I'm still that 8-year-old boy sitting on his bed, knowing that I'm not loved. This is what Jung called a complex, an emotionally charged experience that gets frozen in time, that continues to operate in the psyche, and that influences all relationships, all choices, all of life, without the person realizing it. Ethan's complex was the complex of the unloved child. And that complex had been governing his life for 34 years. But hold on. Because what happens inside the child's mind in that moment is even deeper than it seems. Jung observed that when the child finally realizes they are not loved, they face an impossible choice. A choice that will define the entire structure of their personality. The choice is between two equally devastating options. The first option is to believe their own perception. This means accepting that their parents, the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally, don't. That the world is a place where love isn't guaranteed. That you can exist and still not be worthy of love. This option is devastating because it destroys basic security. The child loses the illusion that the world is safe, that they are protected, that everything will be okay. The second option is to deny their own perception. This means deciding that their perception is wrong, that their parents do love them, just in a different way, that the problem isn't with them, it's with you, that you're the one who isn't seeing things right, that you're too sensitive, too demanding, too problematic. This option is devastating because it destroys trust in their own perception. The child learns to doubt themselves, to distrust their own emotions, to believe that their worldview is defective. Most children choose the second option because it's less terrifying, because it still preserves the illusion that their parents love them, that the world is safe, that everything will be okay if they just change, if they're just better, if they're just worthy enough. And it's from this choice that narcissism is born, because the child who denies their own perception needs to create an alternative explanation, needs to find a reason why they're not receiving love. And the explanation they find is always the same. I'm not good enough, and if I'm not good enough, then I need to become good enough. I need to be perfect. I need to be the best. I need to prove that I deserve love. And so the false self is born, the mask, the persona that exists only to be loved. Let me show you the 5 phases of the psychological collapse that happens when a child discovers they are not loved. The first phase is the realization, the perception. This is the phase in which the evidence accumulates until it becomes impossible to ignore. It can happen suddenly, as in Ethan's case, or it can be a slow process, lasting years. What defines this phase is the shattering of denial. The child can no longer pretend not to see. The truth imposes itself. The second phase is the shock. This is the phase immediately after the realization. The child enters a state of derealization. The world seems strange, unreal, as if nothing makes sense. Carl Jung described this as a temporary psychological death. The child's ego can't process the information, so it shuts down. Many people describe this phase as a void, an absence of emotion, a sensation of floating outside of one's own body, a truly disconnecting experience. The third phase is the attempt at reversal. This is the phase where the child desperately tries to prove that their perception is wrong. They change their behavior, try to be perfect, try to be invisible, try to be what their parents want them to be. It's the negotiation phase. If I do this, maybe they'll love me. If I change that, maybe it will be enough. This phase can last for years, decades, a lifetime in some cases, a painful, endless loop. The fourth phase is collapse, or adaptation. If the attempt at reversal fails repeatedly, the child reaches a decision point, a fork in the road. Some children collapse. They develop depression, anxiety, self-destructive behaviors. It's the crushing recognition that no effort will be enough, that they will never measure up. Other children adapt. They accept that they won't be loved, and they build a life around that reality. They develop extreme independence, emotional coldness, detachment, a protective shell. Both responses are forms of survival. Neither is healthy. Both carry enormous costs. They shape the entire course of their future. The fifth phase is crystallization. This is the phase where the patterns become permanent. The defense mechanisms that the child developed to survive become part of their personality, the very fabric of who they are. The perfectionist who never stops trying to prove they're worthy. The ice queen who never lets anyone get close. The codependent who desperately seeks validation everywhere. The narcissist who compensates for the emptiness with grandiosity. All are adult versions of the child who discovered they were not loved, each wearing a mask, hiding the pain. Now, here's something that most people don't understand about this process. This is crucial. The realization of not being loved doesn't happen just once. It repeats throughout their entire life. In every relationship, in every situation that reminds them, even remotely, of the original experience, it echoes. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat. It's the complex at work. The child who discovered they were not loved will unconsciously recreate that situation repeatedly. They will choose partners who don't love them properly. They will sabotage relationships that are working. They will interpret neutral situations as rejection, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the complex needs to be confirmed, it craves validation. Because it's easier to maintain the existing worldview than to build a new one, even if that worldview is painful. Familiarity trumps healing. Let me tell you about a woman named Olivia. Olivia was 35 years old and had a history of failed relationships. 3 engagements, all ended the same way. The partner eventually left her, walked away. When Olivia came to the therapist's office, she was sure that she was just unlucky, that she chose the wrong men, that the universe was against her. She felt cursed, but when we started to explore her past, a pattern became clear. In all 3 relationships, Olivia had done the same thing. The moment the relationship got serious, she started testing, created crises, provoked fights, distanced herself emotionally. She pushed them away. And when the partner, exhausted from the constant tests, finally left, she felt validated. I knew it. I knew he didn't really love me. What Olivia didn't realize was that she was creating the rejection, was provoking the abandonment, was ensuring that the original perception that she wasn't lovable was confirmed. She was writing her own tragic story. When we explored her childhood, we discovered the moment, the ground zero. Olivia was 6 years old. She was the middle child. The older sister was the smart one. The younger one was the pretty one. Olivia was the middle one. The one with no defining characteristic. The invisible one. The forgotten one. She remembers a specific day. The family was taking pictures. Her mom was organizing the poses. She put the older sister on one side, the younger one on the other, and Olivia in the middle, wedged in. But when they were about to take the picture, her mom said something, casually, callously. "You should have positioned yourself further back. You're blocking your sisters." It was a small phrase. Maybe her mom didn't even think before she said it, thoughtlessly uttered. But for Olivia, it was the confirmation of years of suspicions. "I'm in the way. I'm a bother. It would be better if I wasn't here." And she spent the next 29 years proving that she was right, choosing men who would eventually confirm that she was in the way, that it would be better if she wasn't there. A vicious, self-fulfilling cycle. That's the power of the complex. It doesn't just shape how you see yourself. It shapes the choices you make, the relationships you build, the entire life you create. And all to confirm a perception that a 6-year-old child had in front of a family photo. The tragedy of it all. But here's something crucial that I need to show you. Pay attention. There are different ways to discover that you are not loved, and each way creates a different type of wound, a different type of adult, a different set of scars. The first way is active rejection. This happens when parents explicitly demonstrate that they don't love you, through words, through actions, through obvious physical or emotional abandonment. The message is clear and cutting. "I never wanted to have you. You were an accident. My life would be better without you." Children who suffer active rejection usually develop a deep-seated rage. They know they were rejected. There is no ambiguity. And that clarity, as painful as it is, allows for a certain processing. They know who to blame. The problem with active rejection is that it creates a sense of self-worth that is completely destroyed. The child knows they are rejected and internalizes this as absolute truth. "I am unlovable." The second way is passive neglect. This happens when parents simply aren't present, not physically necessarily, but emotionally. They exist, but they don't see. They don't hear. They don't respond. They are ghosts. The child speaks, and no one listens. The child cries, and no one comes. The child achieves, and no one celebrates. The child suffers, and no one notices. This form is more confusing than active rejection, because the parents are technically present. They don't say cruel things. They don't abandon. They just aren't there. But the child feels the emptiness, feels the absence of connection, and can't name it, can't quite grasp what's missing. Jung observed that children who suffer passive neglect frequently develop identity problems. They don't know who they are because no one ever mirrored them. No one ever reflected back who they were. They are lost. The third way is conditional love. This happens when parents love, but only under certain conditions. When the child performs, when the child obeys, when the child is what the parents want them to be. "I love you when you get good grades. I love you when you don't embarrass me. I love you when you are perfect." This form is perhaps the most insidious, because there is love, just not the unconditional kind. The child receives love, but the love comes with conditions, with demands, with a price, and the child learns that love isn't freely given. It's earned, it's deserved, and it can be withdrawn at any moment if they fail. Carl Jung observed that children who experience conditional love often develop pathological perfectionism. They spend their lives trying to deserve love, without ever believing they've succeeded. The fourth form, destructive comparison. This happens when the child is constantly compared to someone else, a sibling, a cousin, a classmate. an impossible ideal. Why can't you be more like your brother, Josh? Look how Sarah, the neighbor's daughter, behaves. At your age, I had already accomplished so much more. This teaches the child that they aren't good enough just being themselves, that there's a better version of them they should be, and that they always fall short. Jung noted that children who endure destructive comparison often develop chronic envy and an inability to celebrate their own achievements. Nothing is ever enough, because there's always someone better. The fifth form is role reversal. This happens when the child needs to take care of their parents instead of being cared for, when they become the confidant, the therapist, the adult in the house. You're the only person who understands me, sweetie. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're so mature for your age. This seems positive on the surface. The child is valued and needed and important. But the price is their childhood. The child who cares for their parents can't be a child, can't have needs, can't be fragile, can't require care. And they discover that they aren't loved for who they are. They are loved for what they do, for the function they fulfill. And if they stop fulfilling that function, the love disappears. Jung observed that children who experience role reversal often develop chronic exhaustion and difficulty receiving. They know how to give, but they don't know how to receive, because they never learned that they deserved to receive. Now, regardless of the specific form it takes, all of these experiences lead to the same place. The child discovers that they aren't loved unconditionally, and that discovery creates the same wound, the primary narcissistic wound, the hole in the center of their being, that no achievement and no relationship, no success can ever fill. Let me show you the signs that you carry this wound. The first sign is the difficulty believing you are loved. If you're in a relationship and constantly doubt the other person's love, if you need repeated confirmation, if you interpret silence as rejection, if you expect abandonment at any moment, this indicates that the child inside you still doesn't believe it's possible to be loved. The second sign is the tendency to test relationships. If you create crises to see if the other person will stay, if you provoke them to see how much they can take, if you push people away and then resent them when they leave, this indicates that you're still trying to confirm the original perception that you are unlovable. The third sign is the difficulty receiving love. If you deflect compliments, if you minimize demonstrations of affection, if you feel uncomfortable when someone does something nice for you, if you think there must be a catch, this indicates that the child inside you learned that love comes with a price, that nothing is free, that if someone is giving, it's because they'll want something in return. The fourth sign is the constant search for validation. If you need others to confirm that you're good, if your self-esteem depends on what others think, if a single negative comment can destroy your day, this indicates that you never developed an internal sense of worth, that you're constantly seeking outside what you should have received from your parents. The fifth sign is the attraction to unavailable people. If you always fall for those who can't give you what you need, if you choose partners who repeat the pattern of your parents, if healthy relationships seem boring to you, this indicates that the complex is governing your choices, that you're unconsciously seeking to recreate the original situation. The sixth sign is the difficulty trusting. If you expect betrayal, if you constantly monitor the other person, if you interpret any ambiguous behavior as evidence that you're going to be abandoned, this indicates that basic trust was broken in childhood, that you learned that the people who should love you can hurt you. Now, if you recognize several of these signs, I need to tell you something important. This isn't permanent. The complex can be worked through, the wound can be healed. The child who discovered they weren't loved can finally learn that it's possible to be loved. But this requires a specific process. Carl Jung described this process in detail. He called it integration of the complex. Let me show you the 5 steps. The first step is the recognition of the moment. You need to identify when the perception formed. What was the moment or the moments in which you understood that you weren't loved? For Ethan, it was the forgotten birthday. For Bethany, it was the photo where she was in the way. For you, it may be another moment, maybe one you don't even consciously remember. The important thing is to bring that moment to consciousness, to name it, to recognize that it happened. The second step is the validation of the perception. This is the part that most people avoid because it's painful. You need to validate that the perception was correct, that you really weren't loved the way you needed to be, that the fault was your parents', not yours. Many people skip this step. They continue defending their parents, saying that they did the best they could, that it wasn't that bad. But as long as you don't validate the perception, the complex remains active, because the part of you that saw the truth continues to be denied. The third step is grieving. After validating the perception comes the pain. The pain of having been a child who wasn't loved. The pain of having lost the childhood you should have had. The pain of having spent years trying to deserve something that should have been given freely. This grief is profound and necessary. It's the only way to process what happened. Many people try to skip the grieving, try to go straight to overcoming, to forgiveness, and to moving on. But it doesn't work. What isn't mourned continues to haunt. The fourth step is reparenting. After the grief comes the reconstruction. This means becoming the father or mother you needed to have. It means looking at the child inside you, the one who discovered that she wasn't loved, and giving her what she didn't receive. It means saying to her, in your own words, what your parents should have said. You are loved not for what you do, but for who you are. You are enough, exactly as you are. You deserve love, without conditions. I am here, I won't go away. It may seem strange at first, talking to yourself, welcoming your own inner child. But that is the only way to fill the hole, because no one else can give you what your narcissistic parents didn't. Only you can do that now. The fifth step is conscious choice. After doing the internal work comes the external part. This means consciously choosing not to repeat the patterns, not to test relationships, not to sabotage good things, not to interpret everything as rejection. It means realizing when the complex is activated and choosing to respond differently. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires practice, repetition, repeated conscious choice. Every time you choose to trust instead of test, you weaken the complex. Every time you choose to receive instead of deflect, you heal a little of the wound. Every time you choose to believe in love instead of doubt, you rewrite the programming. Let me tell you what happened with Ethan after 2 years of work. He finally managed to believe that his wife loved him. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instantaneous. It was 2 years of recognizing the anniversary moment, of validating the pain of that 8-year-old boy, of grieving the childhood he didn't have, of reparenting himself daily, of consciously choosing to trust. And one day, his wife said something simple, "I love you." And for the first time in 42 years, Ethan was able to absorb it. He told me in my therapy session, with tears in his eyes, "I finally believed it. For the first time in my life, I believe that someone truly loves me. This is integration. This is healing. According to Carl Jung, understanding and integrating these fragmented parts of ourselves is key to wholeness. Here's something important about generational transmission. If you've discovered that you weren't loved and haven't worked on that wound, you will transmit it to your children, not on purpose, but because you don't know how to do it differently, because you can't give what you didn't receive. You can't love unconditionally if you've never experienced unconditional love. You can't mirror your child if you were never mirrored. And the cycle continues, generation after generation. The only way to break it is to do the work. Heal your own wound in order to love your children the way you needed to be loved. If this video made you remember a specific moment, if it brought to mind the first time you realized you weren't loved, if you felt that tightness in your chest that indicates something was touched, that's good. That's the child inside you finally being seen. The super thanks button down below is a way to support this work. Each video like this requires deep research in Jung, in developmental psychology, in childhood trauma. Your support allows me to continue bringing this type of content. But more important than any support is this, that you start the process, that you identify the moment, that you validate the perception, that you grieve, that you reparent yourself, that you consciously choose not to repeat, because the child who discovered they weren't loved deserves to finally know that they are. In the comments, tell me, at what age did you realize that your narcissistic parents didn't love you the way you needed to be loved? What was the moment or the situation that made you understand? If you can't identify a specific moment, tell me which of the signs you most recognized in yourself. And if you want me to make a specific video on how to heal one of the specific forms of discovery, tell me which one. Active rejection, passive neglect, conditional love, destructive comparison, role reversal. Tell me what your wound is. There's a moment in the life of every child raised by narcissistic parents that changes everything. The moment when they finally understand that they aren't loved. It's a devastating moment. A moment that shapes their entire personality, their entire life. But it doesn't have to be the end of the story. Carl Jung believed that even our deepest wounds can be pathways to profound healing. Because the child who discovered they weren't loved can learn, finally, that it's possible to be loved. They can learn that the original perception was right about the narcissistic parents, but it was wrong about them. They were, and always were, worthy of love. Until the next video. Remember, as Carl Jung said, the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Your journey is unique.